Hello, marketing rebels. It's Fab here, your marketing BFF and head teacher at Marketing School, a modern school teaching you how to market to hearts. And together each week, we share the freshest news, tactics, and insights that you simply can't miss. But this week, it is indeed a bit different because I'm joined by the one and only Lara, good friend of mine that you might know from Found Flourish if you are in the entrepreneurial world, and also our freshest, so to speak, guest teacher to talk about community, which I'm so excited about. So thank you so much for being here with us today to talk about community in light of the masterclass that we're doing together around community strategy. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Fab. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
I'm going to ask you one question that just to kind of set the tone around the community piece that we're talking about today. If you were to choose one word that encapsulates the Found and Flourish community, what would that be?
That's a good question. And I can't say community, can I?
You could if you wanted to.
I'd love to say vulnerability. And if I can pick two, family. I'll tell you why. Because everyone always says how safe they feel in the space. Even when they come to the events, like they feel like they're meeting up with people they've known forever, and they can ask questions that they wouldn't necessarily feel they could ask in another space. And I think that's a really special, trait of the community, which I'm very proud of.
I absolutely love that. I actually do this exercise with our students in the student community, and also our students after the certification, just to see what words really come up for them. And this is a little trick as well. That's why I wanted to ask you. If you are looking to build a community, regardless of where this community lives, I think it's nice to first of all think about what words come up to you, and then as you are building that community and as it's shaping, it's nice to hear what your members are taking out as the main thing. We had fun from our students, which is nice, I guess.
Love that.
And it's good because it's one of our values. You know, we talk a lot about values in the masterclass that you run with us, and that's kind of good that is reflected there. But also there's a lot of support. So similar to that vulnerability, which I love is in your space. And I think it's important to understand whether this is where you want to go with your community. And we talk about a lot in the masterclass that is like, you know, how do you want to show up yourself in a way that refills your cup as much as anything else? And we talk about it from a perspective of different reasons why. But I want to add one more question when it comes to that, because, you know, creating a community that aligns with you doesn't sound strategic at first. It sounds more like a nice to have. And I think that's one of the misconceptions or one of the obstacles that we can find when you're building a community, trying to get to people and be like, no, honestly, it's important that you do this. So if somebody was like, I like the idea of actually aligning the community with how do I want to show up and my values, but aside from the fact that it can make sense from a strategic point of view, what do you think is important, as well as all the other reasons that we talk about in the class?
It's important because if you are showing up in a way that is not aligned with your values, you are very slowly, if you're anything like me, dying a little inside every day. If you're doing something in a way that does not feel aligned, that means you are going to be getting resistance, right? You're going to have resistance against it. And over time, you are going to resent it. So, I mean, from a strategic perspective, I think it is essential to understand what lights you up, what's important to you, what looks like a good day to you, what looks like good work to you, what looks like your ideal customer and the person and the problems you're trying to solve. Because if you can nail this, then yeah, you're going to wake up on days and think, oh, I can't be bothered because it might be, I don't know, that time of the month, it might be rubbish weather outside, you may have had a late night, whatever it is. But more often than not, you are going to wake up passionate about what you're doing. And when you run your own business or you work in a company and you work the majority of your life, it has to be something you care about, because if it's not, you will give up. You'll either get miserable, you'll become depressed and burnt out like I was in the media industry when I was working in a job that I didn't realize I hated so much until I looked back and was like, wow, I can't believe I did that for as long as I did, thinking that that was my only option. And I think there's this sense of freedom when you can really define what it is that's important to you and what lights you up and what you can enjoy doing, because that gives you a sense of purpose. And that sense of purpose is so key in life in general for your happiness and well-being.
That is such a great point. And I'm going to add another angle to that because I think you elaborate that perfectly. So that's so important. And on top of that, going back into that point where you said when the days there are not really good days. But on top of that, I think, at least that's what I found when obviously we hear your opinion as well about it. One of the most beautiful things and hardest things to achieve as a community builder, whether it's a small community or even a bigger community, you can argue the smaller can have more engagement, but engagement in general can also happen with bigger communities. But taking your members and going from passive consumers or digesters of content, passively consuming and making the most of the content to actually be actively engaging and becoming moderators and facilitators, it's invaluable, but also it's harder than what people think. And I find that, so just to reiterate what you said, that is also a great side of a great show of a great community. But there is this misconception that will happen from day one. And there's a misconception that it's not going to be some months or potentially days, but I'm going to say months for a lot of us, but we just have to show up ourselves in the best possible way to lead by example. So I think that's another thing from a strategic point of view. And that's what I've found. Engagement is so important. Even if it's a community where there's minimal engagement, and if it's a podcast community, for example, you only ask them to maybe, input their questions or share what they want to see next. Even that can be such a hurdle for people. And then if you go for communities that actually have the accountability piece and the conversational piece, is a whole other game park. So I think that's another thing to remember. If you don't find ways that you can consistently show up where it looks like nobody's listening, but they are, I promise, then it's going to be hard for you to reap the benefits because it takes time. Is it only me, or is it something that you've seen as well?
No, I totally agree. I think I probably would quit 10 times over if this wasn't something that I really cared about. Because my God, it's tough running a community sometimes. And no one builds a community to make money. No one builds a community because they want to be rich. They build a community because they want to solve a problem and they want to connect people and do something they're passionate about. And so that is so key, but that's why I put a focus on monetization as well, because you cannot sustain it without monetizing it. But the two work hand in hand. And I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with you, on the days when it's hard to show up or you're wondering if anyone's listening. It's that idea of you being totally aligned with what you feel you were meant to do. That's what's going to keep you going on those quiet, slow, tough days when you start questioning everything. So yeah, definitely.
To follow up on that question, and we're going into the second layer or a further layer after you do create the beginner strategy, which we're going to do in the masterclass together. Then at the end, you're actually going to have something you can take and reuse also for clients or for further communities or just revisit. But then there is the next step. You got all of this, all the things you talk about in the class, some of the things we talked about as well now, like values and what you want to show up as. But then there's also one thing. Then what I find, a lot of magpie marketers and people out there, then either because your members tell you about it or because you see something or you get an idea, you want to add more or you want to explore new formats or you want to do new things. And I think this is important to mention, even if we're just looking at the beginner strategy. First of all, because let's say that you actually are very structured and you watch the masterclass and you're like, no, I'm going to do what Lara said. I'm going to just identify the core things I want to do. But then I find that FOMO creeps in or ideas creep in or you see something and you want to try and test it. So I wanted to ask your approach with that. Let's say we have our strategy now, we're starting now, and we start thinking, should I add this or should I shift this? And especially the addition piece, I think is something that I see again and again in communities. Should I do more? Should I do other things? Should I diversify? Is there something that you say to other students or to other clients or even to yourself when it comes to deciding whether you should take up something, maybe you should take out something when it comes to a community after you have identified and defined all the different things that you want your community to be? How do you approach that?
That's a really good question. So the first thing is I ask the community or I listen to the community. So if there's multiple people saying, I'd really like, for example, live perfect example that happened yesterday. We started Found Flourish in London. So we hosted our events there. That's where we built the main part of our community. And then I moved down to the coast. And so there's obviously another big focus down here now. And we run hugs and brunch events, which are our networking events across the country. Does what it says on the tin. You leave your ego at the door. You hug people when you walk in. You have a delicious brunch. You talk about life experiences, challenges, etc. It's fantastic. And one of our longest, one of the members who joined literally when we launched our beta version back in 2019, said, "Oh, I'm really missing the events in London. Haven't seen any, scheduled recently. We do have a hugs and brunch event, but this one, this month is specifically for founders who have ADHD, because we wanted to create that space for people to talk about neurodiversity in a safe space. And that's hosted by Katri Barrett, who's one of our members and an ADHD expert. She has it, she coaches in it. So I had a chat with her, and she then said how she'd been talking to other members and that they were also wanting to connect with others in London. And I was like, well, this is a no-brainer. We need another event happening this month for the London community to connect. And that was like a real kind of gut instinct, right? This is what they're asking for. This is what they're saying they need. So I'm going to deliver it. That's a really easy decision to make, right? That's a simple example. Sometimes when there are other things that you think you want to add or offer, there's a bit of a framework that you can use. And the simplest way that I can describe this, because it's on a Google sheet, is you list the things that you're doing and you rate them in terms of out of 10, like the effort that you put into them, the return that you get, maybe the impact that it's having, and you start to see the rating system that you have. And I think when you have an idea to add something else to that mix, you can kind of predict maybe what that's going to look like in terms of energy levels, impact. Is that going to give you a return on investment? Is that going to give the members that value exchange that they're looking for? And if you're unsure, ask them. We have surveys, we have polls, we put things out to them. If we've got an idea about launching something, we give examples. We're running a series of events with a partner who's a member. So she put a poll in the community this morning and she said, hey, everyone, we're thinking of doing events on this. Here are a couple of options. Let us know what would be of most interest. So I think there are different ways to approach it. And it's about really, if you want to add something to the community mix, ask the community, is this going to be serving them?
I absolutely love that. And I think my only follow-up question, which I know maybe it was coming, was, but what if the community is not responsive enough? Or what if you don't get enough data from the community? Would you just say then, I'm going to wait until I get the community to tell me what they want? Or would you find other ways to do that? Because I think that's my other thing, especially thinking about smaller community. That's my follow-up question.
Yeah. Test and iterate, baby steps. If you're thinking of launching a program, maybe write the first module and launch it as a workshop. Test and iterate, ask people, bring people into the conversation. You might not have a community yet, but you're connected with 10 people on LinkedIn. One of them might be your target audience. Speak to them, send them a DM. Can I jump on a quick call with you? Have a virtual coffee. I've got a few questions to ask. Launch the thing, but have it low risk and then build on that. And when you start seeing it having impact, when you start seeing people engaging with it, you know you're onto something, then you can increase the risk or increase the effort and you can start to launch something bigger. But I think the concept of starting simple and starting small is really key here.
And I add to that as well, another objection that people might think, and like what we have experienced as well, is that if you test, I think some people are like, well, even if I test and I only have 10 people in my community and then I don't keep doing it, what are they going to think? And this is why I want to see what you have to say. But I want to say from my personal experience, having run 2 communities, and one I ran for 6 years. So it's been a long time. People don't mind. Actually, I find that when you're open up front and say, we're doing this thing, and then you're like, we're going to try. And then it was like, well, we're not going to do this anymore because it's just, we saw that there's no need for it. People are like, okay, it's fine. Let's move on. I think as long as you're upfront and open on why you're doing it and why you're testing it, it's better for you to do it because people genuinely will not remember in 6 months' time. And I think, and that's a big stop, isn't it? For a lot of people, like, oh my God, people are going to hold me to that.
Yeah, and people feel exposed, don't they? But if you're taking people along the journey with you and you're saying that we're trying this new thing, we're going to give it a go. Like, we run series of events now in quarters. So we say this series, we're going to be doing one on, and then it might be back to school where we, invite an expert to speak about something every month for 3 months. And then we kind of gauge it. We send out surveys, we find out how the community responded to it, and then we either reintroduce a similar series or a completely different one. But I think, again, it's that like low, shorter commitment times. Like, we're going to try this out, we're going to give it a go for a month or a week. If it works, great. If it doesn't, we'll try something else. And I think it's always a process of test and iterate. That's how you learn. That's how you figure out what works and what doesn't. Feel the fear and do it anyway. I know that sounds quite cliche, but just give it a go. What's the worst that can happen? People don't like it, and then you stop doing it. That's it.
I love the idea of the iterative. It's almost like building an iterative calendar. It's like taking, obviously, the strategy, and if you want to put it into practice in a way that feels just kind of starting out, that's a great way to look at it. It's just looking at the values, looking at all the things that you pulled out from your strategy. And obviously we do it together as well in the class. And then you can say, okay, these are some of the things I want to try. Maybe these are the things that I want to show up as. And then, as you say, I like the idea of, I think asking the questions is something that we're afraid that nobody answers. And I was like, well, the worst thing that happens if nobody answers, really, they just don't. And then, you wait and then you ask again. That's what I find is, like, if nobody answers, that is okay, but at least you ask. And the more you ask, the more people expect that to be the questions. And then you will find it becomes a lot easier. It becomes a practice, doesn't it?
And also the beauty of running events, whether it's online or offline, is that you create these spaces where you can actually have more two-way conversations with people. So you can say, hey, I was thinking about doing this thing. What do you think? Let me know in the chat, or ask them face to face. And I think, that connection piece is really key. If you're not connecting with people on that level, you're never really going to get to know their drivers, challenges, and how you can show up in a way that's going to be really valuable and serve that true purpose that you're looking to serve. So I think, making sure that you're really connecting with these people so that you can ask those important questions too.
Then I have one follow-up question on that then. You put yourself in a pickle because now I have a follow-up question. Because a couple of the way that we talk about monetization include also formats that are low-key engagement for the members that maybe don't involve events. Like we mentioned a few, but one they mentioned is podcast. So let's use it maybe as an example. So in that case, what would we say, Joe? Because obviously we're also expecting less engagement. It's more about support. How would you do that when it comes iterating or maybe potentially trying new things or trying to get the community to be more responsive, knowing that you don't have that two-way conversation as much? Okay, so with your podcast, how would you usually connect with your community to understand what it is you need to be showing up as? So, for example, we launched a newsletter and we put on meetups. We had conversations, then we launched the podcast. And from either listening to podcasts and other people talking about their communities or us having conversations with our own communities, we realized that there were certain topics that we wanted to focus on and talk about. So I think there's always an opportunity there to connect with people. And if you just have a podcast, I mean, that's a really interesting question, because your community are your listeners, right? And they might leave feedback, they might write, reviews. But I think it's understanding like who your listeners are, understanding, their behavior, their user behavior, if you can, just looking at the data. If you're not able to have those two-way conversations, look at the insights, look at what information you do have access to. But I would love to see, with a podcast, maybe like a newsletter or a Substack or something in tandem, so that you can say, hey, listen to this podcast and then come over to Substack. It could be free or paid for, but Substack's a lovely format because you can write, people can comment, and you can say, oh, we're going to share this over on Substack, so write in the comments what you think, So actually there's an abundance of platforms now available to us. There's no reason why you can't have a platform for people to share the conversation after listening to your podcast. I love that. And I have one final kind of question, because I think within our strategy and then some of these kind of practical application, there is quite a lot to think about as well when it comes to structuring things. But I love the idea. I just want to reiterate one more thing you said about quarters. We work in quarters too. First of all, because we're a small business and I have a small student community. So it's just like also more practical, but also again, it helps with iteration. And also I find it helps you starting to build the calendar and try new things. I think monthly can be too short, just like any kind of audit and review. I always say monthly reviews are good, but an audit is nice to do it every 90 days. And I think a calendar has a nice sweet spot. And I see some people that really want to push themselves with 6 months and a year, but times have changed so much where communities have gone booming during the pandemic and then things slow down again. So I think, it's kind of like understanding the balance. But one more thing I wanted to ask you was, I'm going to give my piece and then I want to hear your piece. Mm-hmm. Based on a strategy, what would be one thing that people can learn when they're building their strategy? I know that we talk about a lot of things that people can learn when they're building their community strategy that can make, their community more unique. I'm going to give you my piece. It took us a while though, but what we have learned is actually what we want to call our members, and you can call them members if you want. But in the end, we call them rebels because we're marketing rebels. And it took me a while, I want to say as well. It took me about 9 months almost to kind of get there from the inception of actually making the brand more unique. And then I realized that then the rebels can be in the newsletter, can be our listeners, but I was like, actually it can also be our students. They become marketing rebels. Obviously they're students, but also they become marketing rebels. And I think that made that, for us, it worked well. You don't have to do it, but that was one way that we took actually our strategy. We went back again and look at what the community is and who is it serving. And I was like, that's who they want to be. That's how we are different. Let's use that as the little badge that they can wear and how they can define themselves. Anything from you based on the strategy, what we learn from who we are, how we want to serve people and things like that?
I mean, the thing that resonates with me the most with what you just said was we like to address them as flourishers. That idea of, really flourishing, being part of a community and having that opportunity to connect, create and collaborate with other people, which is one of our taglines. But I think also going back to this idea of like vulnerability, part of our strategy is really to create these spaces where people feel home, people feel safe, people feel like they can be vulnerable. And that's also tied in with things like our Hugs and Brunch, which is our signature event. You come, you drop your ego, you drop your guard, you give people a cuddle, you talk about how you're feeling, and everyone's really open about everything. And it's lovely. People don't feel like they have to pretend they're something that they're not, because it might dampen their chances of a lucrative business deal. It's not like that here. It's not a business network where you're there to gain from others. It's actually where you're there to give and share. And that ethos kind of runs through everything that we do. So I don't know if it's part of the strategy, but it's definitely part of how we show up on a day-to-day basis on the platform, across our content and at our events.
I think it is. And actually, when we think about it, the strategy goes back to the idea of like values and also how you want to show up. So I love the idea that like that becomes top level, which again, this is why we have a masterclass around it, because you got to do a top level so that you can learn. And then we talked about iteration, but then also, as you say, cross-pollinate it around the day-to-day, whether it's a signature event, whether it's how you call your people, whether it's even how you build your community inside the community itself. If it's a platform, maybe you build it in a way that prioritizes that safe space, support smaller groups instead of more like a consumption, and I think that's really important to say. So I love that you mentioned that.
And that is what we do, actually. You're right. From a strategic perspective, there are smaller micro groups and there are places where people can ask the community. So yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Fab.
Well, I learned from you. I also consumed the masterclass myself. Therefore, I learned that and I just wanted to kind of give us some application of it. So first of all, I want to say thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge as well. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. You're a star.